Today on Aspiring Women, a teenager contemplates taking her life.
I started to think about how bad my life was and things like that, and eventually a train started coming.
Hi, this is Aspiring Women. It's good to see you. Okay, we're laughing because we're talking about the teenage years.
Yes, and they're not a laughing matter
funny at all.
I would not go back to that for anything.
No.
And I wouldn't go back to parenting teenagers either. Oh, please. My daughter had, in many ways, she had a charmed life,
Yeah.
but she still went through this place where she hit a wall, and I think most kids in puberty do that.
And if we're not careful, we're not paying attention to that.
Yes,
we think,
that's true.
that's just what teenagers do. But there's a lot of messages probably in those times.
That's true. And you were saying that, kids staying by themselves in their room and everything, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not.
No privacy till you're paying the mortgage, I always say.
I'm going to tell my son that.
And sometimes extra stressors come into a teen's
Sure.
life.
Especially now.
Especially now. Oh, my goodness.
Life is completely different from when we were teenagers.
That's the truth. And I think the teenage years for me zipped by so quickly, probably because of the extra stressors. I don't think I enjoyed it.
They're hard. They're hard on the teen and they're hard on the parents. But Kristin Anderson was a bright, happy child who thrived on friendships. The youngest of 3 children, she didn't have a care in the world until several unexpected tragedies shattered her life completely.
I didn't have a lot to worry about. I had everything that I needed, most of what I wanted. I had a great family, lots of friends. I loved playing soccer and hockey. I was very social, especially in high school. And I was very much a people pleaser, very much a people pleaser. I wanted to make everybody happy around me.
Like many busy families, Kristin and her parents would attend church on Sundays, but kept God at a distance during the week.
I really saw God as a very distant, faraway God. I didn't have any idea that he had interest or anything to do with the personal details of my life. So I didn't go to him for help or strength or understanding or peace or anything.
When Kristin entered high school, she became rebellious, which strained her relationship with her parents. It was during this volatile time that a tragic series of events began to take place in Kristin's young life.
First, one of my friends was diagnosed with cancer in her brain, and she died of a brain tumor. Then one of my friends died in a motorcycle accident, and then another friend died in a car accident, and then my friend Brandon killed himself. During the time that those last 2 friends died, I was also being stalked by 2 guys, and following that, I was raped by another guy.
It was at a party where she had been drinking, and the rapist was an acquaintance, so she never told anyone. Because of this and all the other tragedies, Kristin's naturally happy demeanor turned angry. Seeing this dramatic change, her parents realized she needed help and sent her to Christian counseling.
My parents took me all the real places that I needed to go, but it never, helped me the way that it could have. And I also, didn't want help, which makes a difference as well. I didn't want anything to be wrong with me. I was very prideful.
Denying that she had a problem and not accepting help, Kristin soon began to sink into a depression that was out of her control.
I just felt like life kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it was never going to get any better. I didn't talk about college. I didn't think about it. I didn't really think about the future at all. I had started smoking and drinking and just driving recklessly because I didn't value my life anymore. I was living my whole life pretty haphazardly and careless and recklessly. I was just hoping that my life was going to end and there wouldn't be a future for me.
Spiraling into depression, Kristin thought endlessly about her friend Brandon's suicide.
Being the people pleaser kind of person I was, I felt like I should have been able to do something to help him. I took a lot of personal responsibility for him taking his life. One time I was sitting in my bedroom thinking about how he did it, because he took his life in a very graphic way. He hung himself in a cemetery. And I just didn't understand how he could take his life to begin with, but most of all, why he could do it the way that he did it. And in that moment, as I was having that thought process, as I thought I could never do it. I could never do it, especially the way that he did it. And then my thoughts changed to, well, if I ever did do it, how would I do it? At that moment, I went through a lot of different things in my mind, and none of them I thought would be successful until a train went by my parents' house right in that moment as I was thinking about it. And it just snapped in my mind. That's one way I could never live through it.
You know, she says something very key. She talks about not expecting to have a future. And I think a lot of teens are in that place today. Now, it's interesting because her parents did the right things. They noticed that something was going on with her. They got her into counseling, but she was in a state of denial herself.
Oh, and she did, excuse me, Sonia, but she didn't want to admit there was something wrong with her.
Right. And you could go to counseling all day long, but until you open up and really talk about what's going on, it's a waste of time and money. Now, how long do you keep trying? As a mother, you keep trying, keep trying, but when you see that it's not going anywhere, or sometimes it's frustrating, the person you're trying to get help.
Well, Sonia, you are, our poster child in a way, and I want you to share a little bit. But, we as Christians sometimes think, okay, we can't let anybody know we're depressed because we have to protect God's reputation. And if I'm a Christian serving God, I shouldn't be depressed.
Right.
Address that for us.
There are several things I learned about depression firsthand. There is circumstantial depression. And I think Kristen's body was responding exactly as it probably should have in a fallen and broken world. It's a crippling time in her mind and in her spirit, all that she went through. If you change your circumstances, sometimes that does help begin to relieve the depression. But then there are clinical depressions
Physiological,
that it's just like diabetes, and you're just going to need some extra help. You might need medicine or more counseling, or you might need to really tell somebody what these thoughts are and these whispers are.
And it's not a sin.
Oh, absolutely not. It's not a sin. It's just something your body is going through, and it can be a great signal, for your body. When we return, Kristen's depression does deepen, and it leads her to the center of a train track and to the brink of death.
Kristin Anderson was your typical teenager, involved with sports and friends. And then a series of tragic events, including the suicide of a friend, sent her into a downward spiral towards depression. Thinking she had nowhere to turn, Kristin made a split-second decision one cold January evening that changed her life forever.
I walked over to the park in our neighborhood because I didn't feel like I could go home. And I sat on these swings that I'd sat on many, many times in my life. I started to think about how bad my life was and things like that. And then I remembered that in the town that I grew up in, you're not supposed to be in the park after dark. And if you are, the cops will make you go home. I looked around and I saw a set of train cars that had been parked on the railroad tracks bordering the park. I knew that if I went there, they wouldn't see me that far away from the road. So I was sitting there continuing my thought process of how horrible my life seemed to be. And then I remembered that thought process I had had 3 months before when I was struggling over my friend Brandon's death, and about if I ever killed myself, how I would do it. And then I started really thinking, it's worth it, it's gonna get better, there's a reason I'm here. And then I would think the opposite, it's not worth it, it's not gonna get better, there's no reason I'm here. And those thoughts really went back and forth in my mind for about, I would say, an hour and a half. And I really think it was a spiritual battle, and I couldn't have recognized it as that then, but eventually a train started coming.
With the train rapidly approaching, Kristin stepped onto the tracks.
was just a fraction of a second. It was right before it got to me that I decided. It was completely impulsive. It was only a matter of seconds before it went over me. They could have not had time to stop. And I remember it all completely. When the train was going over me, I felt a wind kind of suck at me to begin with, and then it began to push me down almost into the ground. And because of the physics of how fast the train was going, I should have been sucked up like I first felt and pretty much torn to pieces. In the police report, it says that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." The yellow flash that they saw was my bright yellow coat that I had on. And so the police report also says that 33 freight train cars went over me at 55 miles per hour. The train stopped. I began to unclench my fist, open my eyes, and look around to try and figure out what had just happened, if this was even real. It seemed like a horrible nightmare. When I looked behind me to my right, I saw my legs 10 feet behind me on my right. And I knew they were my legs because they had these brand new bright white tennis shoes on them that I had just gotten for Christmas. So I used my arms to crawl out from underneath the train. And when I looked down at my left leg, I looked, and it had been severed so highly that I didn't see anything there. So I looked to my right leg, and it looked like it was gone right below the knee. Took my hand, and I had gloves on, I took my hand and ran it below where my leg had been severed, and I unintentionally brought that hand up to my face, and I saw all of the blood. And when I saw all of the blood, the pain really hit me, because I knew that my legs were gone and I knew I was alive. So I started crying like I'd probably never cried before in my life, bawling. But in that moment, in that time when I was crying, I began to be pretty much covered with this overwhelming peace like I never felt before. And I started hearing the song Amazing Grace playing over and over and over in my head.
When the paramedics found she had lost so much blood, they couldn't believe she was alive. Conscious during the ambulance ride, Kristen was able to give the paramedics her parents' contact information. At the hospital, as they prepped her for surgery to reattach her legs, Kristen asked the doctor if she was going to live or die.
He told me he didn't know. And he really didn't know, but he told me that because he says that he wanted me to fight to die, fight to live. I just needed to fight. And so that's the last thing I really remembered. And I was in surgery all night long.
Kristen survived the night, but the surgery to reattach her legs was unsuccessful because of nerve damage. Her very distraught but grateful family was present when she awoke the next day, but her mind was still filled with many mixed emotions.
One thing I heard over and over and over again was, "Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here." But at the same time, I was regretful that I lived. I never, ever thought that I would live through it. And I didn't want to live my life without my legs. So that was really, really hard for me. And people worried about that. They were like, if she didn't want to live her life with her legs, how's she going to live her life now?
Kristen's story brings back tough memories, I think, for me. It's not nearly as graphic and difficult as she's been through, but I remember sitting in the psychiatric hospital, never believing you'd be there, and having to tell someone all these voices and these ideas of not being in this world, how they come at you. You know, I heard sitting in the rehabilitation center with people who had suicidal thoughts or attempted it. And most often in that circle, you heard time and time again, I really didn't mean to kill myself. So it's interesting that Kristen truly did. She really intended to kill herself. And I thought that was powerful, what she said. Now, how will she want to live without legs? And that's incredibly true. I think you're just grasping at one little straw of hope, and at that particular time, she desperately needed it.
Yeah, but God totally saved her life, because isn't it amazing that she felt something push her down, and that she even survived
even the ride
this.
to the hospital was phenomenal. What
Yeah,
was supposed to take 45 minutes took 9. Well, coming up, Kristen wonders where she would have spent eternity had she died on those train tracks that cold January night.